As the new African nation of South Sudan makes its entry into the United Nations, huge challenges remain. So, what does the future hold for this newly born country? And how will its people face these challenges ahead? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. South Sudan is on its way to becoming the UN's newest member state. The process is underway against the backdrop of internal conflicts and a brewing humanitarian crisis. It was on July the 9th this year that South Sudan celebrated its first day as an independent nation after a 50-year struggle. Both North and South of Sudan have battled two civil wars over more than 5 decades, and some 2 million people have died in the latest war from 1983 to 2005. But the new African nation is still facing many problems and challenges. Humanitarian has the details.
These new graduates are ready for the job. From now on, they will be performing at events organized by the Republic of South Sudan. It's all part of becoming a country. A caretaker government is sworn in, and a transitional constitution is in place. There are plans to roll out the new South Sudanese currency, but it could take time before the money reaches everyone. For a while, people from the Republic of South Sudan will use the Sudanese pound from Khartoum. But there are problems. When Sudan was one country, Khartoum allocated funds to the central bank in the south. Officials say they didn't get their share for June and July, and civil servants haven't been paid.
My statement here is to call on the public and also on the civil service to persevere and be patient for the next 1 month. And from the 18th onwards, depending on the distribution process, your money will be out.
It's not good news for anyone who had hoped the transition from independence to economic growth would be easy. The issuing of passports and identity cards is another challenge. Citizens from the Republic of South Sudan all need new documents, and that is going to take time and money. Officials are negotiating a 6-month grace period with Khartoum to allow citizens from South Sudan to get proper documents, but that may not happen.
Khartoum seems to be passing laws to stop the citizens from this part of the world not to use the old Sudan passport. So that's why we have started with the passport, and I'm happy to tell you that we already have the passport in place. And with me here, I think my colleagues have the passport. This is the diplomatic passport. This is how it looks like.
The conflict in South Kordofan and the contested region of Abyei is continuing to cause tension between the two neighbors. Issues of oil sharing and border demarcation still remain unresolved. Political power struggles and tribal differences continue to divide the population. Many celebrate the birth of a new nation, but the challenges that lie ahead are huge. Haru Matasa for Inside Story, Juba.
Well, the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon certainly seems to agree with Haru there that the challenges are indeed huge. He was speaking at the independence ceremony on July the 9th in the capital, Juba. He said, quote, "The challenges are enormous. Security is still unstable. There is a huge lack of infrastructure. There are socio-economic problems relating to the rule of law. You have to have all of these things established as soon as possible. The United Nations will mobilize all resources possible. Agencies stand ready to work with the new Sudanese government, leaders and people." Also, on Tuesday, the Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir expressed his willingness to resolve outstanding issues with the South. Here is part of what he had to say.
We will press on to resolve the outstanding issues despite their sensitivity. The serious and honest cooperation will continue with the African Union's high-level implementation panel under the leadership of Thabo Mbeki with respect to South Kordofan and the Blue Nile areas. Our aims are security, stability and the implementation of the comprehensive peace agreement in regards to its security arrangements.
Although the two countries, North and South, look set to divorce in name only, they haven't reached an agreement on a number of disputes. Those unresolved issues include Abyei. Which country will own the border region of Abyei, which accounts for roughly 13% of all oil exports? Citizenship. The northern government had hinted before the referendum that southerners will not enjoy citizenship rights and jobs in the north, with Parliament on Wednesday giving approval to cancel citizenship of all South Sudanese. Also, President Bashir is reported to have ruled out dual citizenship. And the management of oil resources is still unresolved. Sudan's proven reserves are estimated at 5 billion barrels, with most of it in the south. Joining us now to discuss this topic are three guests in Juba. Andrea Minala, a program director at IKV Pax Christi, that's an NGO working for reconciliation and justice, not only in Sudan but throughout the world. In Dubai, Ibrahim Kayat, an economist and chairman of the International Centre for Strategic Analysis. And in Nairobi, Douglas Johnson, an historian specialising in Sudan and southern Sudan. He wrote the book, The Root Causes of Sudan's Civil War. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Minala. Congratulations. I mean, how does it feel to soon be a member of the United Nations family? Does it mean anything to you?
Thank you very much. It means a lot. To be a recognized member of the international community is not something simple. It is what all of us people in South Sudan has been aspiring for. It has been more than 2 decades of sacrifices. People have shed their blood and paid the ultimate price, that is loss of life. More than 2 million have gone simply to be recognized internationally, to have their identity, to have their integrity respected by all, whereby justice and equality is prevailed to everybody. So to be a member of the United Nations, it is now, you are recognized internationally by international community.
Mr. Kayat, do you think that this move will bring about any type of economic stability to the country?
There is no economy basically to be stabilized. There is income that goes into the hands, basically 40% of the oil revenues go to directly, or used to go to the popular movement who was using it also for all this money to support its own army and the rest of the military, the militias it has. But on the other hand, there is only 8% paid to the health services and 4% to the education. So we have a real problem in South Sudan. Independence is very beautiful. It's something sacred. They are recognized. But this doesn't mean that the state will burgeon and become effective the second day, or there is a real market. For many reasons, if we have time, we can probably discuss.
Okay, Mr. Johnson, that certainly is one of the steps, isn't it? And Mr. Kayat saying that this is a very beautiful thing. But until southern Sudan can stand on its own 2 feet, it needs to deal with security. We've got a massive security underway at the moment, what's been described as genocide in the Nuba Mountains. What's happening there?
Well, it's quite true that in the immediate future, South Sudan faces a number of challenges, and the security is one of them. The unresolved issues, not only of South Kordofan, but Blue Nile and Abyei, not to mention Darfur, are going to mean that the government of South Sudan is going to be concerned with its own security, especially around the border, for a very long time. However, the longer those issues remain unresolved, the more dangerous they become to Khartoum as well. Because if the fighting along the border spreads, then it's going to spread beyond the border region. It's going to spread beyond South Sudan. There are other areas of Sudan, like the east, even in the Nubian heartlands, where there's a great deal of popular discontent and popular political discontent, where if the fighting along the north-south border continues, you could see other risings threatening the security of Khartoum.
Who do you think is behind this fighting?
In the short term, Khartoum can do a lot of damage.
Sure. I mean, who do you think is behind this fighting at the moment? The South certainly believes that Khartoum is behind this.
Well, Khartoum certainly has been, if you're talking about South Kordofan, the fighting is between the government forces and the SPLA forces of the Nuba Mountains. If you're talking about South Sudan, there are certain areas where there has been there's a certain amount of discontent among some disappointed leaders. But as far as the information that I've received, and as far as I can tell, there isn't widespread discontent that is being mobilized by anybody. You are getting arms, you are getting equipment, you're getting propaganda from from Khartoum, and you are certainly having armed groups being very troublesome. But at this point, you don't see any real popular mobilization against the Republic of South Sudan or the government of South Sudan.
Okay, Mr. Manila, what are you hearing about these mass graves that have been discovered in South Kordofan in the Nuba Mountains? What sort of impact do you think that is going to have on your, I guess, reconciliation progress?
South Kordofan people are our brothers and sisters. And in fact, what is taking place there, it is ethnic cleansing. It is a genocide. And the mass grave is supposed to be a awakening point for everybody to talk about it and to hold the people responsible and bring them to books. It should not be a simple thing. What is taking place in South Kordofan, it is a serious issue. Because if you go to the CPA, whereby South Kordofan was part and parcel of that CPA agreement for consultation and how the transition period will end when the South secede from the North, it's very clear. We are wondering why should be there war? Why should be there bombardment of innocent civilians, children, women? So in fact, it's not only the grave, it is still the people who are still alive subject to imminent death for no reason. Just people don't want to respect agreements. So
and of course, this is leading to an horrific humanitarian crisis. I mean, Mr. Kayat, you wonder what sort of impact this humanitarian crisis, the claims of genocide, the border dispute is having on the economics of South Sudan. It's going to make it very hard for investors to get interested in the country.
I don't think so. Basically, now what we are seeing is the rhetoric against the government in Sudan. I believe, just to remind, Avi Dakhtar, who used to be in charge of security in Israel, in a lecture in 2008, he said, we are going to work once the South has got its independence to weaken the government in Sudan, because we would like to surround Egypt, not making it strong. And after what's happening in Egypt, I think there is some political or security services work there to create or to make these mass graves who must be long, dated from a long time before, just coming today. So there will be a next push towards Khartoum to destabilize the government, the central government.
Okay, who are you suggesting is behind that then? Let's pick up on that point.
It could be the government. I'm not making an investigation, but I'm talking now. If I anticipate there will be a pattern of issues that will be antagonizing the regime in Khartoum, trying to destabilize it regionally, internationally. But to come back to South Sudan, I think in South Sudan the government will be able at least to maintain control over its own territory. The problem would be how to create a state from scratch. There is no proper administration. I know there are a lot of NGOs, their budget is around $600 million a year. And usually the consultants and the NGOs take around 40 to 60% of the money that is spread on the poor. So let's say that in South Sudan we have around $300 million spent to create an administration, at least to aid the population. How many years do we need before we can have proper paper pushers in the administration who can work to lead to create a proper administration, proper ministries, to provide services to the population? I think we will need 3 to 5 to 6 years, on condition not to have any big security issues on the border or Abyei becoming again another issue, another conflict region between the south and the north. But basically, we don't have a generation of paper pushers in the administration. We don't have a proper administration. We don't have an infrastructure for the government itself. We don't have an infrastructure in the whole country, 600,000 square kilometers, which is huge. And then also, we will need time. The way that South Sudan will be connected to the regional market is not probably going to help creating industries inside this country. Uganda is exporting around items for $250 million a year. We have 200,000 the population in Juba who come from Kenya, mostly come from Uganda, Ethiopia, and these are exporting and are street vendors who are bringing merchandise from other places. How can you control the borders and allow an industry to emerge or to burgeon?
Okay,
So
you've brought up quite a few issues there. Let's try and pick those apart, and I'll bring in Mr. Johnson here. One of the issues that Mr. Kite raised was the influences within the country. He mentioned Uganda, he mentioned Israel. There's so many other countries who would be involved in North and South Sudan. What do you make of the international players and their intentions in South Sudan in particular?
Well, there is, if you go back to the Independence Day celebration on Saturday, there was a huge focus, an international focus on South Sudan. It's not just joining the UN, it is also joining regional organizations like the AU, IGAD, but also the East African Community. And sitting here in Nairobi, I'm very conscious that there is a great eagerness from Kenya and from Kenyans to become involved in the commercial development of South Sudan. And I think that what you're going to find, especially if South Sudan or when South Sudan joins the East African Community, this is going to make it a lot easier for the transfer of funds for the investment and even the investment in local industries. It is quite true that right now almost everything that comes into South Sudan is imported, but that was the case back in 1983. That was the case during the war. But you now have a lot of the uncertainty of the future of the country has been removed by the referendum and by the Declaration of Independence. And every time I come back to South Sudan, I see new banks. There's Ethiopian banks, there are Kenyan banks. These are going to help facilitate the commercial development, the building of roads, the establishment of internal markets, so that areas of surplus, such as Western Equatoria, can get their goods even to Juba, but also to other areas of South Sudan and possibly even into the rest of the North Sudan. So yes, it's going to take a good long time. It's going to take another 5 or 6 years before a lot of this infrastructure is in place. But the international involvement is going to be one of the things that helps that rather than retards it.
Mr. Minala, all that sounds rather positive and a good outlook for the next 5 to 10 years. But one of the issues to getting money, to breaking down the disparities in the South, is to stamp out corruption amongst your politicians. Is there the will there to do that?
Corruption is a disease, and when it is diagnosed, I believe the medicine is there. Yes, South Sudan, throughout the interim period, it has been labeled with that there was no good governance, there was corruption rampant all over. I will not disagree with this. It is true. But it is identified, and since it is identified, the solution is there, getting rid of it, zero tolerance to any corrupted person who is not national, who doesn't take the nation in his heart and put it before him. These all have been taken care of. I believe our president His Excellency Salva Kiir has stated several times that there will be a time whereby there will be zero tolerance to any corrupted
But do you think it'll help if there was a viable, a feasible, excuse me, interrupting, opposition? Do you think that'll help put some pressure on the interim government, on Salva Kiir and his sidekicks to stamp out corruption if there really is some kind of opposition party who will hold them accountable?
Oh, already we are now having caretaker. We don't have any longer ministers who are in charge of the ministries. They are now caretaker. This is a clear indication, the commitment of the president to make a change for the better. And he has already talked of an inclusive, broad-based government whereby transparency and good governance will be respected.
Okay.
And all the oppositions now, they are in dialogue on who is to join the government. And people, I believe people are happy with this kind of
let me put that
democratic, broad-based government.
Sure. Let me put that point to Mr. Kayat and the point about transparency. How do you make the oil industry now transparent? I mean, there's no deal yet between the North and the South, and I guess for both their futures, they need each other.
Still, the oil has to go. The only pipeline available to export the oil from South Sudan. South Sudan is the third country exporting oil after Nigeria and Angola in Black Africa. The oil has to go through to Port Sudan, and Khartoum has the control of the money, which is dispersed after that and given to the south. But the problem is there is no transparency by both sides, south and north. Probably there is 25–30% of the value of this oil that is hidden, and nobody can even have access or control to it. Both politicians from both sides. Corruption is not only in the north or in the south. They already have made deals between them to control the oil, which is the real manna. 98% of the income of South Sudan comes from the oil. There is another problem linked with oil and also the Western assistance. I know there is a humanitarian effort by the West, but also there are companies behind politicians who are also keen on forwarding or developing their business in such countries. Oil usually means mafia, equals mafia. Why? Because what you want, if you have an oil in a country, so it is beneath the earth. So who knows the value? The ruler, the government is in place, who doesn't have technology or capital. A foreign company will come, will make sure that the government is weak to dictate the price or the portion it is going to take from the oil and from the richness that is in the ground.
Mr. Johnson, I mean, do you agree with those sentiments there? Do you think that oil could be a trigger for renewed conflict and conflicts beyond its borders?
Well, obviously oil can be the cause for a new conflict, but as the previous speaker said, both sides do depend on that oil to a greater or lesser extent. So that if there is a conflict over that oil, a long-term conflict hurts both sides, not just one. And I think that you also have to look at what has happened in the wider region. The discovery of oil deposits in Uganda changes the outlook of the export of oil from South Sudan, because there will be a refinery that will be built in Uganda for its own oil. South Sudan can have access to that refinery for refining its oil and for exporting its oil. So although it is true right now it is dependent on the pipeline and the refinery in the north, that isn't necessarily going to last for much longer. It also improves the prospects of a pipeline from Uganda to the coast of Kenya, which South Sudan could not develop on its own on the basis of its own oil reserves and oil industry, but which it can now participate in with Uganda. So all of this is going to change the equations internally in the Sudan and in South Sudan over the development of the oil industry and the export of that oil to the wider world.
Okay. Douglas Johnson, we're going to have to end on those words. Thank you very much for joining us. So many issues that we haven't even dealt with regarding South Sudan. Also, thank you to Andrea Minella and Mr. Ibrahim Kayat. And of course, thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye.